Yeah, I suppose coming into 2019 and starting just before vintage was really exciting and quite fast paced to be coming in so close to vintage. And it was a really unique opportunity to look at some of the wines that we've been making up to that point, knowing that the conditions were shaping up at like quite a great vintage. So I didn't want to lose that opportunity. Yes, I wanted to pay respect and make sure that we build on the gains and the styles that we'd evolved to that point, but also to take some learnings from my past. And so I think I looked at the vintage as a really unique opportunity to come with a fresh head and think about how could we continue to evolve. So I look back at those wines now and some of the 2019 releases that are coming out and think I'm really happy with how they sit, as they're very craggy wines and they're very wines of our vineyard, but they definitely speak to an evolution that we're trying to bring to the wines. I think the great thing out of the 2019 vintage is, we made some amazing wines and some wines that are definitely some of the most unique and special I've been involved in. But then to not rest on our laurels and take those learnings into 2020. And there was a couple of them that were probably, we experimented a lot with stem usage, in particular in Pinot and Syrah in 2019. And those wines were so ethereal, and they really have actually shaped the La Salle and the Araha respectively. So I think we pushed that into 2020 and looking at the 2020 wines, they've really benefited from that. Another was the experimentation of large format, whether it be looking at concrete vats, which are the Nico Velo vats that we were fortunate enough to obtain for this gone vintage in 2021, but also the engagement with special coopers, getting a couple of boutique coopers out of France that we hadn't used before to really add that kind of 1% to 2% at the top end to accentuate the wines. And then mainly a big learning was actually how can we evolve together in the vineyard, to kind of to form wines that are perhaps different but better reflections of the things that might potentially have been lacking in 2019. And I think that was a really key driver, was working closely with the vineyard on some stages through the growing season into 2020 to really enhance those wines.
So we've expanded our sustainability program. We've got a really exciting project down at Tamuna, looking at increasing our biodiversity across the whole vineyard. We've got a native planting program that's taking all our unplantable vineyard area and taking that into native trees, and to really improve that area on a whole, and actually improving the environment beyond our vineyard benefits, which is good for the community, where we work, and obviously the wildlife around it. Across all our vineyards too, we're improving our use in terms of organic techniques, so using less herbicide, looking at undervine techniques to remove that and improve our soil health, and fine-tuning our canopy management methods too, really fine-tuning in terms of Pinot Noir and Syrah to get exactly the right levels to preserve those aromatics that make the wine so exciting.
Yeah, 2019 was a bit of a dream, really. I think we'd had, coming off the back of two probably more complex seasons with regards to untimely rain. The spring was shaping up to be quite wet in both the Martinborough and the Hawke's Bay region, but around Christmas the skies cleared up completely in both regions, and this period of sustained dry and warm conditions was just magic, and it continued for the entirety of the vintage period. There was that benefit of having a full water profile, and then the vines not requiring supplement water, and then not drying out much. And I think that spoke to it, the wines for me, is they have vitality, which I think I can really put down to having that cooler, wetter spring, but then they have so much power and energy, which is speaking to that warmer vintage. So, it's as a winemaker and a vine grower to have those external factors that are forcing you to make picking decisions. It's the most desirable outcome. For me, in the first vintage here and now looking at the wines, I definitely think that in combination with vine age, that we've potentially got at the greatest summation of positive factors for potentially our greatest vintage to this period. John, about what was your take on 2019 compared to the years previous?
It was fabulous. Out of that whole decade, really we hadn't had a vintage anywhere near that quality since 2013. And as you said, we did have a few challenges in spring, especially with some large frosts in Martinborough, but we're very fortunate to have overhead sprinklers there, which means we got through that period almost without any damage. So it definitely affected flowering for Pinot Noir. So some extremely low yields, which obviously ramped up that concentration and quality at harvest time, which was a bonus. And then, yeah, that extended dry period with some very healthy canopies just set the vines up in a good stage. And there's nothing better than the luxury of picking on flavour and actually, as you say, making those decisions purely around wine quality with no compromises. And I think the wines reflect that element of just absolutely no compromise.
The 2019 Leboco Chardonnay, our prestige Chardonnay. It's a single block Chardonnay from just outside the winery here on the Inlet Gravels Vineyard, made up entirely of the Clone 95. And I mean, I'm an avid Chardonnay lover, and making it's one of the most enjoyable grapes to take through the entire ripening period through to making it. And I think what makes this Chardonnay so special for me, and what I really see in the 2019 was the energy and the vitality and tension. And I think that's really important in Chardonnay, is not to go chasing flavour. I think if you have everything in a row, flavour will come. So everything that was picking decision based was about making sure that we retain tension. And then in the winery, it was almost about focusing on things that would not add to it or take away. It was more about concentrating on a drive and a line in the wine. So, you know, it is wild yeast fermented with a malolactic fermentation, not the entirety of it, and long time liaison tank. But I think everything about that was elongating the palate and making this beautiful, intense but tense Chardonnay. And I think for me, John, definitely a lot of that energy comes from the soil type in that vineyard.
Yeah, it's an interesting block. It is remarkably stony, and a lot of our management is about how to just retain that acidity, to create that tension in the wine. So it has very minimal canopy management. We don't want bunches overexposed. We want them to be very natural in their flavours. And I think, from my point of view, that elegance comes through in the wine as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm really, really excited about how it's just started to unfurl itself. I think it did exactly what we wanted to do when it went into the bottle. It was kind of like shy, and now I just see that level of richness coming, but not at the sake of freshness. I think it's still got so much drive.
Absolutely. And it's very linear. It just carries through that palate so solidly with that freshness.
Yeah, and I think that's unique. I think that there's a lot of people that are trying to retain that in this area, in this country, and I'm just really excited that that's a style of our house Chardonnay that we're expressing year on year, and I see it in the 20 and the 21. The 2019 Araha, a single vineyard Pinot, Tamuna, and not a single block wine, but definitely from a special part of the vineyard in particular. So Tamuna, which has got two terraces, and the top terrace being where all the Pinot Noir are planted. There's a kind of beautiful mid-slope, which is not, it's reminiscent of some of those kind of mid-slopes through Burgundy, where we've got these select blocks in particular of Dijon clones, but then also the Abel clone, which is a really special clone. And, John, I think that Abel clone, it works in conjunction with these Dijon clones to give you perfume and complexity.
Yep, absolutely. And those, for that vintage, the crop loads were very light. So in terms of that concentration and just ramping up that phenolic and tannic ripeness, it was just the perfect season to do it in those conditions.
Yeah, and in terms of production, this wine ends up being about 65% whole cluster. In a warm vintage, I think that's really important to kind of pull back potentially some of that pure fruit and add layers of complexity. And I look at this wine in particular now, and it's definitely the most perfumed Araha we've ever made, and I think it stands out. This vintage is a very perfumed vintage, and then in the mouth the tannins are very silky and long.
Absolutely, it's got beautiful concentration, but that liftedness just gives it just another element. It makes it quite ethereal, really.
Yeah, it's Pinot Noir that it's almost like the aroma that lights your senses, but it is really that length and that silkiness that is just phenomenal. And I think it's potentially a standout wine of the vintage, along with the soul, and I couldn't be more pleased with how it looks.
Fantastic.
In 2019 La Sol, I think coming to Craggy Range, it was probably the wine that I was most familiar with and most excited to make, and it's actually an honour to make that wine. It's so revered within the country, but also externally as one of the top Syrahs from in terms of the style and uniqueness. And yeah, I found it really interesting. The blocks here that have made that wine have been historically the same, and there's amazing intensity, but probably that didn't change, but how he made them change. But I know for you, Jono, it's probably within the Gimlet Gravels, it is the warmest and stoniest and most unique parts of it that we have.
Yeah, absolutely, and really kind of that section of block 8 and 9 just have such a natural balance, probably above and beyond any of the Syrah blocks on the site. And they're incredibly stony, and they've kept in check, and it just gives the wines an incredible intensity, but an amazing tannin ripeness too.
Mm. And that was very critical for me. It was a very long, elongated ripening period for this one in particular, and it balanced alcohol. But the stems were, they were brown. They were so ripe, and it was really important because I think if I look at our sols of the past, there's always been fruit concentration. So how do we improve the wines? And I think now it's about layers. And this wine ended up being 60% whole bunch fermentation. Obviously, you can't see it. It's just this amazing perfume and layers in the wine, but it's still got the graphite and the pepper and the red fruit and to black fruit that we're synonymous with the soul and that concentration. But I think now it's got just so much more energy and higher tone. Would you agree?
Oh, completely. The aromatics are so lifted, and they're beautiful and perfumed, and almost quite feminine, but it's really balanced out with those savoury aspects coming into that middle palate. There's such a lovely savouriness and almost light meatiness to the wine as well.
Yeah, it's just such a beautiful wine to drink, isn't it?
Yeah, it's delicious.
Mm. The 2019 Sophia, and the wine that probably led us to come to the Gimlet Gravels and the inception of Craggy Range, and occupies such a special place in this winery history and to us to make it. And you need all those elements to line up right, don't you? To have that right blend of Cabernet, Merlot dominant, but Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc ripeness as well. And that's kind of been the tricky thing over the years to perfect it. But for me, all three varietals shone this year.
Yep, absolutely, and that's fun. One of the exciting things in the vineyard is actually finding those specific soil types and parcels that complement each other so well, and have the ripeness and the balance in fruit flavours and tannin profiles to all be adding something special to this blend.
Yeah, I think Merlot up at that 60% level, and I love to just try to extract the beauty from Merlot. Not to look to give. I don't think it needs to be pushed too hard. I think it's got so much kind of beautiful perfume it can add. But then Cabernet Franc, we had a really interesting part in 2019, and I think for us, Cabernet Franc is getting stronger every year off this vineyard, and I really saw it's critical in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it has beautiful aromatics, has a lovely level of ripeness and a real plushness to that tannin profile too, to really fill out that middle palate.
Yeah, and again, like with the Merlot, I think if we look at the vineyard, we've got Merlot kind of across our Gimlet Gravels vineyard, but again, it's kind of the stoniest patches that are shining, aren't they?
Yeah, Block 24 has been an absolute standout from 19 onwards, and it's just every year just hit its straps at the highest quality, and it just has a level of concentration and depth of flavour that is really just has the X factor compared to other parts of the vineyard.
And interesting, like for us, it's always been Merlot dominant, which is the earliest ripening variety when compared to the other two that we're talking about. But the great thing about 19 was it was nice and warm and early, but then that kind of gave us that autumnal period for the other two to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. 19 was a standout Cabernet year. We had all the time and warmth in the world to reach that optimal ripeness and just have the quality exactly where we wanted to.
And I think it really shows that you get that. Yeah, it's got so much fruit, but it's very layered as well. I really noticed there's that beautiful sweetness in the fruit, but not overtly. It's kind of that balance between good tannin dried but fine tannins. They're really fine for me. Yeah.
Extremely fine, and it's amazing how harmonious and integrated those varieties have become to have all these special places that live.
Yeah, it's going to live for a long time.
Yeah.
I think, the 2019 quarry, I think we know it's been a good thing to have made a quarry. It's definitely the most difficult of our prestige varietals to obtain year on year, and that's because it is a Cabernet dominant wine, and the Cabernet is the most susceptible to those kind of late season weather events. But, quarry this year, we made without any question of a doubt it was going to be there. We knew that early on. And, the great thing for me was there were different Cabernet parcels in the Sophia and in the quarry. And I think for me, it's that beautiful thing about it has a really real regional characteristic of Cabernet off this vineyard.
Yeah.
It's that kind of walking that line between being leafy but not green, and it's medium bodied in all its glory.
Yeah, it's definitely got that very much dried herb element. It's really classic Cabernet. And for us, really, to get Cabernet ripened to this quality level is just so satisfying. It's, as you say, it's a challenging variety, and you've done everything right throughout the season to actually get it across the line into this quality level. And for us, it's also just getting that tannin ripeness and that acidity level really balanced in the wine.
And much like the Syrah, there's not much of it in New Zealand, and the fact that it is so suited to the gravels in particular. I think that this has a really unique presence, and I love the fact that it's got, whereas the Sophia maybe is about the plushness and the flavour, the Cabernet is definitely about the length and the drive. And I think Cabernet is a beautiful varietal. I really see it in this wine.
Absolutely, it's got beautiful aromatics for a Cabernet, and those tannin whiteness are just almost verging on silky, the structure, but they just have such a softness and dryness to them.
And probably to talk to the future, getting these concrete vats, which we're sitting in front of, for the Cabernet and the Merlot in particular, I look to the 20s and the 21s, and the tannin integration with these vats and those varieties is just unbelievable.
Superb.
I think, we were so excited about the 2019 and then 2020 came along and then 21's came along. We're starting to sound maybe a bit repetitious, but it is definitely shaping up like a trifecta. I think they're very different, especially in the two regions, whether the 19 is potentially the most beautiful vintage, 20 has got so much power and drive, and the 21, whilst it hasn't unfurled itself, it's definitely, for Syrah in particular, shaping up as potentially the greatest vintage we've ever had. So I think that 3 for me is just so exciting because we're building on the learnings every year, but to see that there's going to be something for everyone in every wine from each vintage to enjoy is just so exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. 20 was quite unique in terms of how dry it was. It had quite a lot of heat, and obviously really the Syrah and the Cabernets and the Bordeaux varieties really lapped that up, and had a very extended dry period, whereas in 21 we were kind of blessed with a season that wasn't necessarily hotter, so it really retained the aromatics very well in both regions. But again, we just had that dream run of perfect weather at harvest, and again pushing things to its limits and to those flavour profiles that we were chasing so hard.
Yeah, it is a luxury when you start talking about which is your favourite vintage and out of 3, and you categorically say one over the other. And I think that these run of vintages we'll be talking about for decades to come.
Absolutely.